Before we talk about the video itself, please just ignore the fact that I don't have arcane intellect or ice armor up, and just enjoy the show. This is my first time actually playing my mage in a little while, and I wanted to do a quick practice stockades run. Alright, let's begin. In this video we will talk about the truth about investing in items in classic WoW, why people do it, why it works, some examples of great investments, the best time to invest, the best time to sell, and so on. For specific topics you can check the description for timestamps, or you can just hover over the timeline on the video and it should be specified what topic is covered when on the timeline as well. My goal with this video is to give you guys a more inclusive look into investing in general, and hopefully give you a better understanding of how investing works, why it works, and how people make money with it, as well as why it gets more challenging over time. As always, if you are interested in gold making in World of Warcraft in general, make sure you join my Discord through the link in the description, as we are the best gold making community in Classic, and I want this community to be the best gold making community out there in Shadowlands and in TBC as well, so make sure you join us over there. You can find a link to the Discord server in the description down below. So let's just get straight into it and talk about investing. Why are people doing it? Because you know what is coming later in the game, you know exactly what content is coming in Phase 4, Phase 5 and Phase 6 and so on. And because these are old raids that have been done repeatedly on private servers, we also know exactly which consumables and items are on high demand in those certain phases and certain raids. It is also very easy to find out which items are needed in what phase through a quick Google search, Reddit search, or just a classic Wowhead search. There are tons of great guides out there both in written form and in video form, so the information is definitely out there. As for exactly why people do it, it's pretty easy. It's to make gold. You can buy an elemental earth for 50 silver in Phase 1, and resell it in Phase 5 for 4 to 5 gold, basically printing gold. Making gold has never been easier. Why does it work? It works because of how the economy works, and because of how the player base spends their gold. Especially early in Classic, everyone wanted that 1000 gold to buy their epic mount, and was therefore selling everything they could get their hands on to make that gold. At that time, Elemental Earth was less than 1 gold, Edgemaster's Handguards was 400 gold, Black Lotus was about 50 gold, and so on. You can quite easily see how people spent their gold on useful items, instead of that epic mount could make tons of gold later down the road. The reasons for prices being so low were a few, but the main reasons for these low prices I would attribute to people needing gold for their epic mount, plus the fact that the game was so new that there wasn't that much gold in circulation in the game itself. As the game gets older, there's more gold throughout the economy, and the average player has more gold now than they did back at launch. Another factor is the huge amount of insane gold farms that have been discovered later in Classic, even raw gold farms giving about 100 gold per hour, and mage boosting giving upwards of 300 gold per hour. As for examples, here are some examples of investments I made early on. Small Flame Sack, I bought this at launch for 20 silver each, and I sold them at the BWL release for 1 gold 60 each. Light Leather, bought for just above vendor value, and sold very recently for 5 gold per stack. I kept juggling the light leather in my mailbox, sending it back and forth between characters to save bank space. I did the exact same thing with linen cloth as well. This is because I knew a lot of people would play Classic at the beginning, and the player base would go down after that. So at launch a lot of people would be playing, and there would be a huge supply of everything, but especially light leather and linen cloth. And people vended it just to get some raw silver to train their spells. Nobody was buying anything back then except for investors, so I was just whispering people trying to buy their stuff very cheap. As for the best time to invest, it's literally as early as possible. Literally, the earlier you start investing, the better. However, right now we are closing in on Phase 5, So what is the best time to invest right now? I would say any type of content drought, or whenever other items are hyped up. For example, I did most of my Phase 5 and Phase 6 investments at the announcement of Phase 4, because at that point everyone was spending their gold on Phase 4 stuff, meaning less people buy Phase 5 and Phase 6 stuff, which drives the prices down naturally because of supply versus demand and auctioneers undercutting each other. The best time to sell is usually whenever a content phase is announced or released. This is usually based on what I like to call static demand versus dynamic demand. Static demand is where there is a certain total demand for that item, and you only need the item once, so you don't need to constantly keep buying it. Dynamic demand is what I like to call consumables, where there is a certain demand from the get-go, but there is also a constant demand throughout that content phase. Examples of items with dynamic demand could be any items used in making protection potions, like elemental fire, elemental earth, or elemental water, but also anything used to create elixirs or flasks, like Firebloom in Phase 5. These are items with dynamic demand. On the other side, examples of items with static demand would be Mooncloth in Phase 4, where every caster needs a certain amount of Mooncloth for their Bloodvine set, but once they had their Bloodvine set, they no longer needed any Mooncloth. Static demand items are usually best to sell whenever a content phase is announced, as people like to be prepared for that content phase. Dynamic demand items, on the other hand, are usually best to sell later in the content phase, as even though people still like stocking up early, the demand for that item will increase over time. And if you have a decent amount of raiders on your server, the demand will outweigh the supply by at least a little bit, so eventually the demand will be higher than the supply, but at the beginning the supply might be artificially increased because of people stocking up and investors and hoarders sitting on tons of items. Eventually, once raiders run out of their prepared stock, and investors and hoarders are sold out of their stock as well, the price will go up substantially because the demand is still there and the supply will be lower. I hope that makes sense. So let's just talk a bit about the challenges of investing in items in Classic WoW. The further we get into the game, the more information people have through written guides and videos. More information and more people having access to that information, especially when it comes to gold making and investing, will reduce the effectiveness of that information. Another huge factor that contributes heavily to the challenges of investing in Classic WoW is the gold in the economy, and the fact that people are sitting on tens of thousands of gold they have no idea what to spend on, so they start investing as well. If we go back to vanilla, people didn't farm gold for 16 hours a day just to increase the number of gold they had in the game. And even if some people did, there were nowhere near as many of those people back then as there is now. You legit have YouTubers and streamers who make a living out of farming gold in Classic WoW and streaming it or making videos on it, allowing them to stay at home and play the game for as long as they want. I also think it's no secret that more unemployed people are playing games now in 2020 than in 2004, and there's most likely more unemployed people now as well, so even if we exclude the YouTubers and streamers, there's still more people spending all their day farming gold these days than there were back in vanilla. And because of how much time people spend farming gold in Classic, the price of everything will go up, and if you don't have the time to farm gold yourself, you will be behind the curve. I think I'm getting a little bit off track here, but the point is, more gold in the game makes it more difficult and more challenging to invest in items, because everything gets more expensive. This also makes it more difficult to be a new player or a new investor in today's economy. You also have the added fact that mages can generally make a lot more gold per hour than other classes, so if you don't have a level 60 mage, you are already behind the curve right there. So I guess I'll sum this up with a few pointers at the end. Invest in items that are used later in the game, think about consumables required in Phase 5 and Phase 6. For example, Firebloom and Elemental Water. realize the difference between items with static demand and items with dynamic demand and when to sell them. Get into investing as early as possible. If Classic ever relaunches, don't go for that epic mount straight away, rather invest in items needed later. And when TBC comes out, let people spend their gold on epic flying, while you invest in items needed later in TBC. Epic flying will be a huge gold sink that will take tons of gold out of the game, so take advantage of it. The later you get into investing, the worse off you are, because the older a game gets, the more expensive the items get, and most gold farms are still worth the same as they were before. For example, you will still get roughly the same amount of gold from questing from level 1 to level 60 now as you did back at launch, but back at launch that gold was worth a lot more than it is right now. Also, the gold per hour from, for example, farming zombies in Sulfurak is still the same now as it was back at launch, roughly. Follow trends when it comes to gold making, level a mage, and sell boosts. But when it comes to investing, realize the trends, understand how they work, and make them work for you. Try to figure out when an item is at its most expensive, and sell them at that point. And likewise, try to figure out when an item is at its cheapest point, and buy them. Check out my Patreon in the description down below, and consider pledging to it, as whenever I find a new gold farm, a new cheesy method, or new investments, that is where I post it first. That way you can get the information before the public, so you can start buying or selling items before other people do. And as you know, both when it comes to investing and selling off your investment, the less people know about that investment, the more profit you'll end up making from it. Speaking from experience, I can buy an item for 25 gold, make a video on it, and see it go upwards of 100 gold. Now, I'm not going to say my video alone did that, timing is obviously key as well, but what I'm saying is that I will usually post investments on Patreon weeks in advance of making videos on it, so you can cash in on investments early. However, we are quite late into Classic, so at this point I'm really just waiting for Phase 5 to be released, which will happen at the end of July, at which point I will sell my Phase 5 investment and reinvest into Phase 6 items and TBC investment. Alright guys, that's it for the video today. Make sure you slap a like on it if you enjoyed it, and remember to subscribe to my channel. Honestly, if you made it this far into the video, why not just hit that subscribe button? Have you done it? Alright, thank you. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did, you should consider watching one of the 2 videos popping up on the screen right now as well. Aside from that, I hope each and every one of you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next video.